I'm so pleased to introduce to you our special guests, Susan Wojcicki and Dennis Troper. Susan was Google's first marketing manager. She was their 16th hire in 1999. She was appointed the CEO of YouTube in 2014. Google acquired the company in 2006 under her leadership as the Senior VP of Advertising and Commerce. She's a leader in business and ideas, notably her advocacy for family leave and gender equality. Her bachelor's is in history and literature from Harvard, and she has an MBA from UCLA, but we are mighty proud of what she did in between those degrees, her master's degree in economics from UC Santa Cruz. Dennis is a product director for Wear OS by Google. He joined Google in early 2003 and has worked in several areas: AdWords, G Suite, Google Fiber. Prior to Google, he was in Oracle, Concur Technologies, and Deloitte Consulting. He has a bachelor's degree in economics from UT Austin and a master's in applied economics from UCSC. Go Slugs! These two powerhouses are husband and wife, and they have, I'm sorry, I'm going to say this, 5 little startups of their own. I am so delighted to bring this event to campus. I've been hoping to do this since my arrival nearly 2 years ago. These are two people who've had incredible reach and impact. They're two people who share our institutional values. They embody what UC Santa Cruz stands for, and they're out there in the world making an impact with those values. They're a product of our institution. We're so proud that they serve as a model of what a banana slug can create. So would you please welcome them to the stage? Now, first of all, you all have had the opportunity to get question cards, and so you have those with you today. If you have any questions that you want to ask Susan and Dennis, you'll be able to give those question cards to someone who will be gathering them from you. So feel free to do that as we do our Q&A here. So I'm going to begin with something a little more personal. I'd love to hear what made you choose UC Santa Cruz and what kind of impact UC Santa Cruz had on you.
Well, first of all, I'll just say it's great to be back here at UC Santa Cruz. This is such an incredibly beautiful campus, and as much as I know that, and we all know it, every single time I come here, I'm reminded of it, and it's even more beautiful than I remembered it, and the redwood smell even better than I remembered it. And so it was the fact, there were many reasons why I chose UC Santa Cruz. I'm a Bay Area native. I grew up here. I had been on the East Coast, and so I wanted to come back and be in the Bay Area. And I thought UC Santa Cruz, well, they offered a master's program, which not a lot of schools offer. And the beauty and the ocean and the redwoods and the amazing teaching staff. I see so many familiar faces here in the front row, whereas all of that was compelling. And we were also both offered the ability to be teachers, to be teaching fellows. And so that was really exciting for me as well. Mm-hmm. And it was a great decision. We both loved our time here, found it just such a fantastic and important part of our careers and growing. And it was a really easy decision for us to come here because it was such a great school and so beautiful at the same time.
Dennis?
Yeah, really excited to be here. Really excited to see my professors where we studied here more than 20 years ago. So it's awesome to see you guys. I studied in Texas, UT Austin, during my bachelor's degree in the late 80s, early 90s. And when I was there, I was very lucky to get a scholarship at Temple University for a summer to study economics. And there was one student from UC Santa Cruz who told me about how great this campus is. And I had never heard about UC Santa Cruz
And you had
until
never
then.
been here.
I had never been here, and she kept telling me that she could see the ocean from the top of the hill, and I was like, I'm there, you know. And the rest is history. Yeah.
So what impact do you think your UC Santa Cruz education had on the way that you move and think in the world?
Yeah. Well, we came here for a master's in applied economics, and I had come from having actually a humanities degree. So I had a degree in history and literature from Harvard University. And when I was in high school, I was very interested in the sciences, and then I had actually moved to more of the humanities in college. And my senior year in college, I'd actually discovered the sciences again. And I'd taken computer science. I started thinking about economics and like having those skills. And so for me, being at UC Santa Cruz, it was an opportunity to really build up my quantitative skills, and that served me so well at Google, because Google is a very quantitative place, and to have had 2 years of just studying math, statistics, econometrics, economics, like all those different components of it really were able to be a foundation for me. And at Google, we spend a lot of time doing data analysis. Everything we do, whenever we run actually any change to our front end or user interfaces, there was an experiment that was run behind that with data and stats. And we know how many more users we get, and we know how statistically significant it is. And so having that foundation that I learned here was really, really important to me. I spent like almost a decade managing Google's AdWords system, our systems, like building the systems that generate the revenue for Google, and that's like its own little economic world. Prices go up, volume goes down, and so that so we have to understand it, like what's happening in our world. And so having really this foundation of economics really enabled me to do that job, which I would not have been able to do otherwise.
Dennis, what about you?
Yeah, I'd say, in addition to what Susan said, I think one of the most important things that I've got from my education here at UC Santa Cruz, we're studying economics, but it's not like we spend hours and hours on end trying to, go after understanding the economic history of Russia or of any other country. It wasn't at all like that. It was more about giving us the tools so that we can actually go by ourselves and try to make sense of the world. And we did that through a lot of econometric analysis and the computers that we had in those days. This is before the internet, but it was still very useful, and we were able to understand what are the variables that affect certain things, right? And make sense of those things. And it is with that mentality that, if you fast forward to our work at Google, it's all about having the tools to build products that we think people will love, okay? At Google, they don't tell us, go and research what, X company is doing or this industry is doing forever and ever, and then come back with a product idea. That's not what they do. What they do is they give us the tools that we can use so we can try and iterate and try again and use a lot of our insights in the process, and then launch products and so on. And so I think there's a lot of correlation between those two things that I think I really deeply appreciate from the work that I had here.
One additional thing I'd say is there's a really important trend right now that the way we think about big data and data analysis is really changing all the fields that we work in. Because the way we make decisions is now based on using a lot of data and having computers being able to process that. And so that as a field is a really important place where a lot of universities are putting more emphasis and focus on that. And data science or decision science, like at a time, it didn't really exist in the form that we know it today. And so in many ways, the basis that we got at UC Santa Cruz was actually a great basis for it, for the beginning of what is today a really important field.
Thank you so much. It's so interesting. So you were both at a place where you were starting from the ground up. You were like at the origins of this massive shift in the way that we culturally operate. Not only could your training not have directly prepared you because it didn't really exist in that way, but you were at the beginning of this moment, and you were also starting a family at the same time. And I know that you've done a lot of work, Susan, on family leave and equity. And so I wonder if you both could talk a little bit about how being a part of that launch pad and doing so many starting new things impacted you, what your thoughts were as you did that work.
Yeah, well, I think, so we got married, well, we met here, we both lived in graduate housing here, and we got married, 5 years later, I think, after various trips. Dennis is from Costa Rica. Dennis went back to Costa Rica. I eventually followed him back to Costa Rica, right? I showed up, much to the surprise of his family.
And she learned Spanish.
I learned Spanish here. Actually, as we drove by College 9 in town, I was like, oh, that's where I took Spanish. We speak Spanish partially at home. So I followed him to Costa Rica. Then I convinced him to come back. We got married, 5 years later?
In 98.
Yeah, in 98. And we had our first baby in 99. And he's now in college, he's a freshman in college. And I think it's like the third, so that stage of your life is a really important and hard part, because you're starting a family and you're at the beginning of your career. And, people always ask me, how did you do it? And I'm just like, I don't really know. We just, did it, right? I wasn't really thinking. And I joined Google pregnant, actually. I joined Google, I was 5 months pregnant. And I just, saw, I think one of the things is, I just saw this opportunity with Google. So in many ways, it didn't seem like a risky decision, because it was so clear to me that this was the future, and this was a really good opportunity. But then at the same time, you're at a startup, and then you have a little baby, and you're struggling at work, and you don't know how to take care of kids, and you've never managed anyone, and then you have a nanny, and that's the hardest person in the world to manage, because they're in your house and taking care of your kids. So I think we just sort of muddled through is the real answer. We were lucky. We lived next door to this amazing daycare, GeoKids.
That's right.
And I always feel like GeoKids saved us, because it was across the street from our house, and it was this amazing childcare, and our kids went there.
Is the childcare from the U.S. Geological Society?
Yes. It's part of the government. So it was government holidays. It was open all the time. And our kids went there. They had fantastic teachers. I think daycare is an amazing experience for our kids. They're very well adjusted, and somehow we worked as a team to be able. I think that's a really important point too. Is we both pitched in to make that work. But that's the hardest. People are always how do you make work and family and work? And I always say that's the hardest point when you're at the beginning of your career. You don't know what you're doing at work. You don't know what you're doing with your family. You don't have that many resources. No one really believes in you yet, and you're struggling with all these at the same time. And that's when I think people are most likely to drop out of the workforce. And we just kind of muddled through.
Yeah. Yeah, the biggest change I made was, you mentioned reading the bios, that I work at Deloitte Consulting, and I was working up until 99, and I had to fly every week to the East Coast and stay there for the whole week with my client and then come back and so on. So when Susan was pregnant, that was the end of that, and I decided to work for a technology company that would keep me at home, and that helped a lot.
So did anyone say to you, you guys are taking a huge risk. You're on the bottom of this startup, and you don't know what's going to happen, and you've got did anyone sort of oh my gosh, you saw it, but did others around you see what was happening too, or did they just go for it?
A lot of people just said, oh, that's so crazy. Why are you doing that? And people would be the world doesn't need another search engine. Actually, I have a bunch of friends that...
A bunch of venture capitalists.
There are a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of people who know everything. We're like, that's crazy. And and then, they're always like, people love to give advice to first-time mothers. People love to, like, people, you'd be like in Target by yourself and some person will come be like, oh, beautiful baby. I hope you're home with the baby. Like, I hope you're like, doing this with their diapers. And it's just, you're a new-time mom. And so you don't know all these people giving you advice. And so that's really that was hard. People don't do that to me anymore. Which is really good, but because they come, I'll be like, oh, I have 5 kids, I know what I'm doing, and then they just stop. But when you say it's your first, everyone wants to give you parenting advice, and everyone has different parenting advice. So, yeah, a lot of people thought it was crazy.
But you persevered, and you ended up doing these amazing things. So, what advice would you give to our students about how they might know what risks to take? You saw it; a lot of people didn't.
Yeah.
What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, when I look back at my career, and I'll say I use like my sister's career, when I think about her career too, she's also, she's the CEO of 23andMe and the founder of 23andMe. And when I think about my career and her career and Dennis's career and kind of like the similarities, I think there are a few things that are really important for students to think about, which is, first and foremost, to think about doing something meaningful with your career. Like, I was not saying like, oh, I want to find a job at a company where I, am like rich and famous. I was like, I just want to do something interesting and that's meaningful. And I have to say, doing something interesting and meaningful gets you through the hard times. I just saw Google. I saw that it was delivering information to people all over the world, and I immediately could see that it was a high impact job. And I'd say the second thing that is really valuable is to choose, or that I think it's easier if you choose an area that's growing. When I joined the internet, like, nobody had really worked in the internet, so nobody had any experience. So it was actually really easy to be like, well, I've been here for 2 years, and then it's like, whoa, she has a lot of experience. And as opposed to if you go into something like banking, which banking is really important, and I don't mean to say that it's not, but like there are many people there that have a lot of experience. So it's harder to move up because of the competition. Other people have more experience than you. And I think we live in a time where there's so many new fields and so many new areas, whether it's like how medicine and computers are coming together,
yes,
right? Or like when we had mobile, all the different mobile apps that like spawned a whole new generation of different companies, and mobile technology was a new area. So I encourage people just to think about what's meaningful to them, and to choose areas where you see growth. And if you do those 2 things, it's really hard to go wrong. You'll have a lot of options either way.
Yeah, look, I'll add just one more thing, which is not only that's what's meaningful to you, but follow your passion is really, really important. And the second thing is don't follow the easy road to things, know that there's a lot of work that needs to get done, and challenge yourself to overcome many things that you thought you couldn't do, but eventually you figure out how to do it. So don't just go down the easy path. In addition to what Susan just said.
I mean, I think that the other thing I guess I'll say that I think is important, and I say this now because I have like 19-year-old and kids like close to college age where I understand this, like, and this is advice I give them too. It's like, it's important to remember, like, you guys don't really have that many skills yet, like when you're in college. Like, I want to just say, like, it's really important to just be like flexible. Like, join a great company, and that you're going to learn. And I see this a lot where kids are sometimes like, oh, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do that. You just join a great company, accept that there's going to be some parts you don't want to do. Like work, there's a reason work is called work. And like there's lots of stuff I have to do, I don't want to do, right? But you have to do as part of that job. And I think just, when I think back, I was just like, it's important just to be, and I just gave this to my son, because he was like trying to get a job interview and they were calling him. I was like, just say like, I'll do anything. He wanted to work at Pixar. I was like, when the recruiter calls you, just say, I'll take any job at Pixar. And because, when you start saying, well, like, I want to have a job that helps me do like only this, like it's like, well, it narrows you into an area. And I want to tell you, once you're inside the company, once you're inside a specific company, like then it's a lot easier to move around. So I encourage you to join great companies, people you can learn from, get whatever job they're willing to offer you, and then learn that skill, do a great job at that job, and then you will be in a good position to get that next job in that company with something that you want to do.
I wonder if you might have any cautionary tales for the audience, any things that you looked back and thought, oh, I wish I hadn't made that step, or I wish we as an industry had done this differently, or are there any things that you would recommend to our students that they think about as something to be cautious or thoughtful about?
I mean, I do think, when I graduated from business school, I remember they gave this commencement speech about the Titanic, because the Titanic had come out at that time, so we were talking about, the whole commencement speech was about the Titanic, and because I was also at UCLA, it was about media, and everyone was talking about that movie at the time, and it really stuck with me in a lot of ways, because Titanic was about somebody who had hubris, who made a big mistake, and people died, as a result. And, that, something about that really lodged. He said, it's possible to make real mistakes. It's possible to really screw up. And that stayed with me. And so I joined Google in 1999. And, in 2000, the bubble burst, right? And everybody, had lost their jobs. People who had put all their family's money into their company were coming and interviewing at Google saying, I lost everything. Buildings, all of Silicon Valley was filled with empty buildings. And I would drive by these empty buildings every day and think, it's possible to really make a big mistake. And I guess I say that because it is really important to stay humble and aware and cautious that you can make mistakes. No matter how well you think things are going, I think it's really important to always be thinking about how you could make a mistake. And never think that you couldn't make mistakes. So I think just always being self-reflective is super valuable.
I'd say, I took your question more about what are some things I would have done, but I didn't, and I would suggest a body like this does it. So I grew up in Costa Rica in the 70s and 80s, and life was pretty good there. It's a pura vida life, and all of those things. And then I came to college. I came to college here in the U.S., and nobody really taught me better. So I just went through my courses, and then I interviewed, and I got my first job, and then my second job, and it's not until later that I figured things out, But looking back, I wish I would have taken advantage of all the resources that are available to us as students here, starting with all the amazing extracurricular activities that we have on campus, clubs, things that you can get involved. So my main point is get involved in things other than the 3 or 4 courses that you're taking this quarter or this semester. There are so many important things that are happening today, from, we talked about climate change, we talked about the oceans that are being depleted of all the fish, women's issues, and not having enough access to technology, and all of those things. Get involved, because that really matters in the formation of you as a person, and it will end up mattering what happens to you afterwards, what you end up choosing to do. So that's one of my biggest advice. I don't know if it's a regret. No, it's one of the things I wish I had done more. So that's.
But what have you done?
I would have worked a lot more on environmental related things at the time. And now I'm doing it through my daughter.
I think you also said Dennis was also very I think you always felt like you had to get a job, and so you're always like very focused on the professionalism.
Right.
And so I think you also have told me, whereas like I studied history and literature, right? I was just like, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I think you felt like I have to do something for my career, and kind of wish you had just spent more time exploring other disciplines too, which I think is really valuable.
Really, really valuable.
Thank you so much. That's really thoughtful. I wonder, as you're looking at universities in a new way now, as you have kids looking at school and going to school and reflecting on your own experience, and so it's really interesting to hear you reflect on this. As you look at universities and you think about your industry, what do you think a university and a university like UC Santa Cruz can do to help encourage and develop entrepreneurship?
You know, I think one of the, you know, it's hard to say maybe necessarily at the university level, but I see it definitely that the skills my kids are learning in high school are not necessarily the skills that I feel like the current world needs. And, and because a lot of first of all, I feel like, you know, a lot of times our, you know, for example, like our daughter who's interested in environmental issues. I think a lot of high school is about learning how to follow the rules, and that's important. You have to follow the rules, but I also think like a lot of the world about entrepreneurship is also learning about how to think independently and being willing to think outside the box and think outside of, you know, just what the teacher's telling you to do, and the schools don't always encourage that. In fact, I feel like they discourage it a lot of times, and at least in the high schools. And so, you know, when I think about like, well, what are the skills that are really useful, and like, what are the abilities that are useful? Well, certainly if you're going to work in like a tech area, you know, there's some amount you need to know. Like, you need to take the tech classes, you need the statistics, you need like some computer. But then to be an entrepreneur, like, well, you need to, you kind of need to know how to hustle a little bit. Like, who, you know, how do you present your idea? How do you get people to believe in you? How do you lead other people? How do you think about an idea of something that doesn't exist today and like convince people that they need it, right? And so those are things that we don't learn in today's school. And so I think, you know, just, you know, I kind of grew up with in my family a little bit, and I think of like sometimes thinking outside the box. I think my mom was particularly good at this. And I think it served us well to realize that like the current thought is not always the right thought, that sometimes like it's okay to question the existing thought, and to be able to realize that even though everyone is saying one thing, it might not really make sense. And like I think to believe in Google at the time, we had to do that. And I don't know, like what you think. So, you know, public speaking is also very important. We don't see like kids learning that enough in school, like how to present, how to talk about their companies, how to sell it, and how to think outside the box.
Yeah, I think, I mean, some of the best entrepreneurs that I see today are people that are very personable, and they understand and they cherish all sorts of diverse set of people that are around them, right? And one of the things that I would, you know, that I highly would advocate for is for each one of you to really make an effort to try to understand cultures beyond the ones that you have been growing up with or that you are very much related to. The demographics just in the United States is changing tremendously. And the more you understand of every single, you know, different types of groups, cultures, the easier will be for you to become a really good entrepreneur. So you can understand much better and develop a lot more insights about the type of people that we have here. And I mean, I'm starting in the US, but it happens all over the place too.
When most people start a company, other people think they're crazy, right? Like most people don't. Is it like if it was such a popular idea, like other people would have started it too, right? And so the idea that you believe in something that hasn't happened yet it's really important. You have to believe in yourself, and you have to believe in something that nobody else believes in. And I think that's like a skill set somehow that we don't teach or encourage.
It really takes a lot of courage.
It takes a lot of courage, and it's hard because everyone is in a sense working against you until you get enough momentum.
Mm-hmm. So these are questions from the audience that I've been reading just recently, and this other question is about how somebody who is underrepresented, either because they're a woman or a person of color in a white-dominated industry or male-dominated industry, like how do those people survive and thrive? How did you do that, Susan, as a woman in a high-tech world? And when you two are hiring, as you look out on the landscape of possible candidates for jobs, what are you looking for? So how can that person who's coming from those underrepresented groups make a mark or make an impression to get a job?
Yeah. Well, diversity is really important to all the companies that we run, and we think about that from many perspectives. And if you look at our audience, they are diverse, right? Like so YouTube has over 2 billion people who come to YouTube every single month. And so, you think about 2 billion people in the world, like that by definition is diverse. And our goal is to make sure that the people we hire are representative of the users that we serve and the creators that we serve, and that they are very diverse too. And it is. We have lots of programs to reach out and to support different groups. I guess I'll maybe talk about myself as a leader, and then I'll talk about for just 1 second, and then for me as like an employee, and being a woman in a male field, like as a leader, I think it has to come from the top. And I actually wrote this Vanity Fair article called I think either busting up or breaking up the boys club in Silicon Valley. And like I said, it has to come from the top. It has to come from the leaders. And the leaders need to say, this is important. It's going to be a priority for my company. And we're going to have programs, and we're going to have recruiters, and we're going to really focus on making sure that that internally it's inclusive. And we do a lot of work at YouTube and at Google to have different employee research groups. We actually just had women at YouTube. They hosted a lunch. We brought all the women together and we did a lunch, but any group can get formed at Google or YouTube. We don't tell them which groups, they self-form, and then there's some amount of funding that they have, and then they have ability to have speakers or lunches and activities that relate to that. I think as a woman in tech, there certainly are for me personally, there certainly have been times that it's been challenging, and I think even if you work in a place that's very well intentioned, there are what we call sometimes unconscious bias, right? Or people just saying things kind of off the cuff, but you're not really sure what they meant by that. And again, this doesn't happen to me now, but I think sometimes there were well-intentioned people, but they would or this concept of people explaining things to you that you already know, or you're in a meeting and the person you're talking to, the customer, keeps talking to your male counterpart, even though you are 2 layers higher in the organization than they are, right? So that, there are things that happen, I think, to everyone who's a minority or an underrepresented group that they don't enjoy, or that are problematic. But on the other hand, as a person, and just what I've tried to do is I've tried to give people the benefit of the doubt, but then also make sure it doesn't get in my way. So and I feel over time I've just developed techniques. When people start to explain stuff to me, they still do it to me. I'll be I already know that. I'm the world's expert in that. Or I have I developed that system. You don't need to explain it to me, right? And so just things, and then it just and I notice people are people are well intentioned. I always assume the best in people. People will. And then they just sort of snap out. Oh, okay, I understand. You know that. And they'll be yeah, let's use our time to talk about things that I don't know about. So I think as any kind of underrepresented group, you develop techniques to be able to handle whatever issues you have. But again, I encourage you to just try to think always, positively and try to make it work, or try to work out whatever's hard. And when there is an issue, bring it up, talk about it, try to resolve it. And be in a place that you think is fundamentally supportive of you. That's like another thing. Like there might be some places that are just not, Google was always very supportive, but there might be many companies that are not, and I encourage you to find one that is supportive of you.
Yeah, I'd say, I'm going to tackle the question from a product perspective. I'm a product person. I director of product management on our wearables division. And what I can say is that, recognizing that you need to have a diverse team in order to create a better product. It's all that matters. In my small little world where I work in wearables, we develop software for smartwatches and whatnot. It's not just about being connected all the time. It's about health and fitness. It's a piece of jewelry that you put on, and it matters so much, the different perspectives from the team. I mean, even the heart rate sensor, depending on the type of skin that you have, you may have different readings from it, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't get that level of perspective unless you have a good, diverse set of people in your team that remind you of all the different things you need to think about when you're putting a product like that. So, taking it up one level, it is important for companies to understand that diversity is not just important for the sake of diversity, which is very important, by the way, but it's also very important because it will make your products ultimately much more successful and more relatable to all the consumers that are out there.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for all of this wonderful insight and for engaging in this dialogue with us. I want to thank everyone here for coming today. I want to wish all of our students good luck on their final exams. And this video will, as you can imagine, be on YouTube in a few days. Would you please thank Susan and Dennis for us?